All right guys, this is another week, another rod review by 6 Cents. This is the 6 Cents Divine series, coming in at $1.99, still on that upper end price point that you want to make sure you're getting something that's high quality when you spend that much money on a rod. So this week, I'm here to review that for you. All right, so this rod is 7/8 heavy with a fast action, and a rod that I've been using for a big swim bait. Now, I think I went a little bit big today with the bull gill. I don't exactly know how much this bait weighs, but it is very heavy. But one thing I have noticed, that even with a bait that's this heavy, I'm gonna guess it's 3 or 4 ounces, I'm not exactly sure. This rod is weighted for 1 3/8. So it is a little bit big for this, but I was throwing an Alabama rig on it, and it's perfect for an Alabama rig. And the Arashi Glide I've been throwing on it, it's perfect for that as well. But even with this big bait that's a little bit too heavy for the rod, the bait is not overpowering the rod. And that's, in my opinion, one of the most important things, is you don't want to try to force too big a bait on a rod, because you're just going to be fighting it. You're going to be scared you're going to break the rod, or the rod isn't going to be able to drive a hook home with that big heavy bait, pulling a fish in and the bait. And especially you notice that on the cast. Like, I don't ever want to wind back to make a cast. I feel like the rod's gonna break in half on the backswing because of such a huge bait that I'm hanging off of it. So maybe downsize a little bit from this big bull gill, but essentially the rod itself holding up great. I've been fishing a bunch. I haven't actually caught one on the glide bait since I've been using this rod, but I have been throwing it a bunch. And from what I can tell, very lightweight, just like all the others. This rod has the same full cork handle, just like the Sensory series does. It is a little bit thick up top where your hand goes, then it tapers down. It has a little bit bigger of a fighting butt with a foam bottom, versus on the other ones that have kind of a plastic bottom or a carbon bottom. That's just a good fighting butt. I feel very confident with it all the way down my forearm, pressed up against my side, kind of tucked into my armpit. If you need to, it's big enough to do that. The rod handle is big enough to kind of squeeze it back there and tuck it in, just to get some of those real power hook sets, some of those big sweeping swim bait hook sets. So really good for that. A lot of sensitivity in this rod, very high end components on the rod. I believe are Fuji guides. That's what you want. Like, you don't want to, if you're paying something that's $200, you don't want to be shorted on the quality of the components. So I definitely feel comfortable with this rod. And here's another thing for me personally, I bought this rod as a swim bait rod. Billy Lawson told me about it. And the thing that I wanted in this rod is, when you're throwing a swim bait, typically that rod weighs a lot. It's heavy. It's a big rod and they're typically heavy. So my thought was, okay, this one really ain't that heavy. I don't want it to break. That's my main thing, is I don't want this big swim bait rod to break. If I'm fishing for a huge chance at a huge fish, I don't want the rod to break. And I'm very confident with this rod. The durability of it so far has been, been really good. So, and also I have been hooking the grass a pretty good bit with this sucker. So I have been reeling in a lot of grass, and y'all know how that goes. A lot of times you're dragging in some pretty heavy stuff. So I'll just say that it handles grass really well. But anyhow, if you guys are looking for a really good swim bait rod, I would suggest this one. It's been handling the baits perfectly, and it's very lightweight. So looking for a great rod, check out the Divine 7/8 Heavy by 6 Cents. You can use my code DC10 when you check out to save a little bit of money. And for the rest of this video, I'm just going to show you guys me casting it using different baits and seeing how this rod holds up with different baits. I've got this 7/8 Heavy Divine swim bait rod. This is what I'm going to use as a Alabama rig rod or a big swimmer rod. And it's got obviously it's got a really long handle. That's the first thing you're going to notice about it, which is what you want on a big swim bait. You don't want to be trying to get by with something that's got a real short handle. I want to get that power tucked in, behind your elbow, kind of in your armpit area if you need to, just so you can make sure you got the maximum power, make sure you got good leverage on the fish. And I just want a rod that's going to be able to obviously throw this bait really far, and so I'm very comfortable with this rod. Being 7'8", it's long enough, and this heavy action. But the thing I really love about this rod so far is it's not heavy. Like, the weight of it's not heavy. And so although it is a heavy action, it is not a heavy fishing rod, which is extremely important, because you go slinging a rod that weighs a lot, heavy, you go slinging a heavy weighing rod around all day, and you're quickly going to get annoyed. And you know, give up on it. So that's something that I think is important, is to have a rod that's comfortable. This rod, I would say, is very, very comfortable. I like this thing because it's got this good power handle. It feels very powerful holding this rod, but one thing you're gonna notice on it is it gives you the leverage in the back to be able to give it a lot of gas and make an absolute bomb of a cast. And then once you reel up to it, it's lightweight and sensitive enough that when that bait's out there, I still feel like I'm in control, and I have a lot of feel in this rod. So I can feel that bait. I'm throwing a big glide bait, so it's going back and forth, and I can feel it every time it hits each side, which is something that's so important, to be able to just be that tied to your bait, especially when you're fishing a bait like this, where they might just come up and grab it from behind. And sometimes the bites aren't always crazy aggressive, not always, and so you want to just make sure you have that sensitivity.